Another franchise that I know a lot of people want to see a continuation of, but also want to see the ship turned in the right direction after, of course, the recent release in the franchise, that being Mass Effect, guys. This is a franchise that obviously has so many accolades, so many different awards that this series and franchise has won, and obviously been nominated for, and has sold millions upon millions of copies, and people absolutely love this franchise. Reminds me of like a franchise like Halo that is just has a significant, very close following, and people in the community are just yearning for more Mass Effect. And obviously what looked to be a pretty promising game, that being Mass Effect Andromeda, ended up turning into some, significant problems, which we'll talk about here. But the big question is, guys, is what happened to Mass Effect? A franchise that obviously was consistently over time just going up on this incline, a community that was growing, flourishing, and then all of a sudden Andromeda comes out and it poses some significant problems for the franchise, and now we got to wonder, where are they going from here? So let's talk about it. So guys, obviously Mass Effect Andromeda is probably the biggest reason why there are question marks around this franchise now. The reception of it upon release, the Microsoft Windows and PlayStation 4 versions of Mass Effect Andromeda received mixed or average reviews, while the Xbox One version received generally favorable reviews from video game publications, according to review aggregator Metacritic. The game was later ranked the 26th best of 2017 by Eurogamer. Conversely, it also received several dishonors, including worst game that we played from Giant Bomb. And now, Mass Effect Andromeda was not well received as its predecessors. In his review for Forbes, Paul Tassi depicted that Mass Effect fans would enjoy the game but prefer the original trilogy outside of perhaps the original game. Many outlets describe Mass Effect Andromeda as a disappointment, including Giant Bomb and PlayStation Lifestyle, who retrospectively ranked it as the worst or the most disappointing game of 2017. Some critics also described the game as a missed opportunity, such as Joe Judah of Game Informer, who concluded that Mass Effect Andromeda is fun and the important parts work. At the same time, I was often left looking through a haze of inconveniences and dreaming about the game it could have been. And that's how I feel about the game, guys. Dreaming of what this game could have been. You look at like the reception overall, and it's not horrible, right? But for Mass Effect, it was pretty low. On Metacritic, PC reviews 72 out of 100, PS4 71 out of 100, and Xbox One 76 out of 100. Then, of course, when you look at, Game Informer gave it an 8 out of 10, which was pretty high. GameSpot gave it 6 out of 10, IGN 7.7 out of 10. PC Gamer 80 out of 100. So when you look at that, those aren't terrible reviews. Those are good reviews. But obviously, people were thinking that Andromeda was going to be something super special, and ended up not really meeting those expectations. And so now you kind of wonder, okay, where do they go from here? Do they go back into the continuation after Mass Effect 3, making a Mass Effect 4? Where are they going to go from here? Because I'm not going to lie, guys, when I played Andromeda, I actually thought it was pretty good. I mean, I didn't think it was as good, of course, as the original games, but it had things about it that I really did like. I just think that there were a number of people out there who just didn't like the side story type of mentality with Andromeda away from the original trilogy. Now, Mass Effect Andromeda was the third best-selling game of March 2017. It led the United Kingdom in physical sales during its first 2 weeks of release. As of August, it was the 7th best-selling game of the year. However, it eventually dropped out of the year-end top 10. The game had the second best physical launch in the series after Mass Effect 3. Andromeda's digital revenues only increased by mid-single-digit percentages against 2010's Mass Effect 3, despite substantial growth in digital sales since then. Further, Andromeda on PC sold less than the 349,000 PC digital units Mass Effect 3 sold in its launch month. Prior to the release of Mass Effect Andromeda, Chief Financial Officer Blake Jorgensen projected that it would sell 3 million units before the end of March and 6 to 9 million units during its lifetime. BioWare General Manager Aaron Flynn predicted that it would sell at least 5 million copies worldwide. Wedbush securities analyst Michael Pachter estimated that Mass Effect Andromeda sold at least 2.5 million units in its opening quarter, resulting in $110 million in revenue. The closest that EA has come to noting an exact figure was in their fourth quarter of fiscal year 2017 notes for investors, which stated that $53 million of the game's net sales related to its special editions were to be captured in Q1 fiscal year 18 instead of Q4 fiscal year 17, the quarter of its release, for accounting purposes. And then during EA's Q3 fiscal year 18 earnings call on January 3rd, 2018, EA Chief Executive Officer Andrew Wilson was asked a general question about the company's non-sports titles, which have performed below expectations. As part of his answer, Wilson noted, if you look at Mass Effect Andromeda, while there was some polarizing sentiment in that franchise, it's actually performed really well, and player engagement is really strong. So look, here's the thing. What does this tell you about the future? Okay, so what happened? I think that we can all agree that Mass Effect Andromeda is kind of like what happened, okay, where it just didn't do as well as the original three. But like Fallout, which we just talked about in the last segment, this is kind of, obviously, this is a, a turn for the worse for the franchise with Andromeda. But at the same time, it sold really well, unlike really Fallout 76. It sold really well. Still, maybe not as good as the original three Mass Effect games, but the idea is that it still sold well. There's still a fan base here, and there's still player engagement. There's a lot of question marks whether or not they're going to make another one, but I think that, look, for every bad game, it takes one game, guys, like I said in the last segment, it takes one game for a series to turn in the wrong direction. It takes one game to turn it back in the right direction. Mass Effect 4, I think, is a game that we will probably see at some point in the foreseeable future, guys, to continue what they started with that original trilogy. The proposed sequel, although Mass Effect Andromeda was not designed with specific plans for future installments, BioWare's original intention was to continue adding to the series. However, following the game's disappointing commercial and critical reception, reports arose that BioWare Edmonton would be taking a break from the franchise to focus on their new IP, Anthem, and that BioWare Montreal would focus on other games under the EA umbrella, such as Battlefront 2, or Star Wars Battlefront 2. In August 2017, BioWare Montreal was merged with EA's Motive Studios, casting further doubt on the future of the Mass Effect franchise. However, former series creative director Casey Hudson, who departed from BioWare in 2014, but returned following Mass Effect Andromeda's release, has stated that he would like for the series to continue. So look, all I'm going to say, guys, is sure, we can talk all we want about, BioWare Edmonton was taking a break from the franchise to work on Anthem. Anthem didn't really get very good reception either. It was kind of supposed to be almost like a spiritual successor to Mass Effect, and it was a pretty big failure as well for a number of reasons. I believe that Mass Effect, guys, is still a very strong brand. Andromeda, sure, didn't get very good commercial or critical reception, but that doesn't mean that a series completely needs to just go to the wayside. If you sell enough copies and you still have a strong following, you can continue making games, but you're just going to have to take your time with it, make something that people really want, single-player experiences, multiplayer experiences, co-op experiences, and go based on the main storyline, that being like a Mass Effect 4, continuing where the third one left off. And so when we look at when can we expect maybe another a Mass Effect 4, you look at in 2007 is when the first Mass Effect came out, and then of course 2010 was Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3 was a couple years later in 2012, and then Mass Effect Andromeda came out in 2017. So what this tells me, guys, is that Mass Effect Andromeda, following that, I believe that we'll probably see another Mass Effect. For those of you who are huge Mass Effect fans, I don't think that this series is dead by any stretch of the imagination. I believe that we're probably a year or two away from hearing an announcement that Mass Effect 4 is underway, and it will probably be a couple years after that when we actually get our hands on it. So don't be worried that this series is completely, dead at this point. There's a lot more question marks around a game like Fallout than there is about Mass Effect. I believe Mass Effect has a lot more gas left in the tank. Now, in an article, guys, that was written by Paul Tassi of Forbes, in case doing a massive Anthem exposé wasn't enough BioWare news for the week, Kotaku's Jason Schreier has also published a follow-up about the state of Dragon Age 4, which was canceled and then rebooted in the past few years and appears to be BioWare's next main project. This is the first I've heard about BioWare getting back into Mass Effect, other than various winks and nods about the franchise from a few people over there. Now, buried in the massive story is a single line that should give BioWare fans some hope. While reporting on the Anthem story, and then in the days that followed, I learned a lot more about the current state of Dragon Age, one of BioWare's two tentpole franchises, alongside Mass Effect, which was put on ice in 2017 following the disappointing Mass Effect Andromeda, but has since been warmed back up. So, granted, whatever is being discussed here is almost certainly years away, but it's giving players hope all the same. I'm a little confused about how BioWare, already struggling in so many ways, is going to juggle Anthem, Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and possible Star Wars games EA asked them to make, but that's an issue for another day. What I'll say right off the bat, guys, is Star Wars. I don't think EA is going to have BioWare really doing that. They're going to have Respawn doing all the Star Wars stuff moving forward. Dragon Age and Mass Effect are probably the two main games that BioWare will probably continue with. Anthem, there's always a possibility there, but because the first game didn't do well, there's really, I think that they're going to move on to greener pastures, in my opinion. When we left Mass Effect, we had just seen the universe dissolve in the wake of Mass Effect Andromeda, which wasn't a sequel in the traditional sense, but instead a game far removed from the events of the original trilogy, even if it did take place in the same universe, though not the same galaxy. The idea was clearly that this would be its own trilogy, but after poor reception and poor performance, not only were any sequels scrapped, but the game didn't even get clearly teased story DLC. It was just nuked with only a few sporadic multiplayer updates once the major fixes were in place. So look, all I'm going to say is that I think that when there was a little bit of some bad reception on Andromeda, everybody just started piling in and basically just creating this negative energy around the game. Guys, look, Andromeda was not as good as the original 3, but I still don't, I think people went a little bit overboard with this game. This was not like a Fallout 76 situation. I think that Andromeda, sure, it was a step in the wrong direction, but I don't think that it was a terrible game by any stretch of the imagination. I think what they were really going for, I actually think was a smart idea, was kind of expanding the universe a little bit, trying to kind of do things in other galaxies, trying to just expand the lore and the story of Mass Effect. But obviously it just didn't hit well, and now that they know that, it's like, okay, they gotta go back to like that original trilogy. They're not gonna be able to do a trilogy based on Andromeda. I don't think anyone is asking for an Andromeda sequel. I like the game more than most and would be curious to see of its plot lines resolved, and yet I think that entire sub-universe is just too tainted at this point to have the glorious return of Mass Effect be Andromeda 2. As for other options, things are a bit murky. Originally, Andromeda was going to be a prequel about the first contact war between humans and Turians, but fans didn't seem interested in that, and that still doesn't sound amazing given that I think most people want new stories to be told. And then the problem is that continuing Shepard's story, or at least what happens after Shepard's story ends, is tricky given the multiple choice endings of the original trilogy that were so controversial at the time. Controlling the Reapers, destroying the Reapers, or synthesizing all organic and synthetic life result in drastically different outcomes for the universe. I'll bet things we only saw play out in short cutscenes. So where would BioWare go from here? It feels like they would have to pick up an ending, say that it's canon and just move on. Shepard did this, the universe is like this now, here's a new story. I don't think we can expect them to carry through choices we made in a trilogy that started 12 years ago, probably 15 plus by the time this game comes out. So I think fans should be willing to compromise if it means revisiting the same galaxy and possible some of the same characters again. And look, guys, I agree with this overall. What I'll say is that I wish Andromeda did well. I know a lot of people wish that the game did well because I would have actually liked to see a continuation of it. I'm kind of one of probably the few that would like to see a continuation of Andromeda because I think it was it had some good ideas. It just didn't land well for everybody in the community. So where do they go from here? I don't want them to continue where, with Shepard and such and what's canon, what's not canon. I think it would be interesting to get some closure there, but at the same time, I think that they should go, a number of years into the future and just say at the very beginning of Mass Effect 4, 20 years later or after what happened in Mass Effect 3, and then kind of go from there. And you start off as a new character completely and explain things. Maybe it's a character from Andromeda, or maybe it's like a different character from the Mass Effect trilogy. It'll be interesting, but I do think they need to move on from Shepard, and they need to kind of, go into a new direction, so to speak, even though Andromeda was going in that new direction, but it was such a different direction because it was on another galaxy and all of that. Maybe coming back to where things feel a little more familiar for Mass Effect fans, that would be a little bit better. But I'd like to hear from you guys. What do you guys think in the comment section below as far as what you guys think happened to Mass Effect? Was it Andromeda? Was it something else? Where do you guys think Mass Effect is going moving forward, and what would you guys want to see in Mass Effect 4? Let me know in the comment section below. And for more Mass Effect content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.